Okay, hi, I'm Patrick Woodhead from a new company called Space Meridian. We just spun out of Protocol Labs, and we spend the majority of our time working on the Filecoin Station network and the Spark protocol. So we're going to go through what the Spark protocol is, why we think it's important, why we're building it, some metrics from Spark, progress we're making, and then a roadmap. So what is Spark? Spark is a trustless protocol for sampling retrievals from Filecoin storage providers. Retrievals is a really important part of the Filecoin network, which has in the past focused a lot on storage, but more and more there is talk about retrievals and how we need to make sure that we're measuring retrievals, we're showing that they're working, and we're providing a good experience for storage providers and clients who want their data to be retrievable. And the other important thing to mention here is that Spark is a trustless protocol. There have been attempts in the past to build a retrieval protocol, such as Retrievalbot, but in those cases, the client that's making the retrieval has always been run by a trusted party like Protocol Labs or the Filecoin Foundation. So we thought it was really important, particularly if the results from this protocol were starting to be used for quite valuable things, that the entire protocol remained trustless. Why build Spark? So we want to improve the retrieval success rate of public data on Filecoin. Currently, people view the network as really more of an archival store, but we want to see like different sorts of data emerge on the Filecoin network. So we've heard a lot today about hot storage, where it can be instantly retrieved, as well as the archival storage. We've also heard in the previous talk from Galen that retrievability is a key area that they're looking into for improving how the Datacap allocation works, and improving how we can sort of get valuable data moving around the network, and how we can start to maybe change even the Fill Plus program based on metrics for what makes valuable data valuable. So in the past, you might have heard people kind of say, oh, the retrieval success rate has been kind of low. Like, what's the problem here? Like, why can't we get retrieval working? I've listed out a bunch of different reasons I think have been the problem in the past, and they're all sort of interlinked as well. To begin with, incentives. Storage providers are currently rewarded for storing data, for doing POREPs, but there aren't really any incentives for providing retrievals. And there's also not a clear proof of retrieval that we can reach for to kind of make the whole thing robust. And that's really kind of what Spark's trying to target. Also, we've just been building pieces of the puzzle. IPNI and Boost, they have been in development over the last couple of years. And the whole kind of retrieval story through Boost and through IPNI is actually quite a recent thing. Once you've got those pieces in the puzzle in place, there's also then debugging with SPs to get that whole retrieval story working. And I can speak a bit more about that in a second. And then also use cases. And I think this is a bit of a chicken and egg thing. People say, oh, we're storing archival data, so we just need to kind of prove storage. And people then aren't storing data which they'd view as kind of hot retrieval data or stuff which would move around a lot on Filecoin. But once we can get the retrieval success rate up, we might then see some of these hot storage solutions like Storatia or Basin use Filecoin storage providers as more of a cache miss layer. And then we'll start to see actually retrieval become more of a bigger issue as we get more data onboarded which people want to retrieve. And then the most important thing, I believe, is just measurability. There have been a few attempts, as I say, in the past to measure retrievability, like Retrievabot, but such tools have actually, they've measured the piece CID retrievals, retrieving the whole piece. So Spark is the first tool which is measuring the retrieval of actual data by its CID. And yeah, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So the first step along the Spark roadmap was just to measure retrievability. And we worked on that over the last sort of 6 months or so. And pieces of puzzle have then fallen into place, such as IPNI and Boost. And over the last month, it's actually been really interesting. Since the Filecoin Foundation have said to storage providers that they're interested in using data from the Spark protocol to measure how SPs are performing, we've had a lot of SPs reach out to say, okay, how do we get this working? And I think we spend a lot of time thinking about like the cryptographic protocols and all these kind of very technical things. But actually a lot of the success we've had over the last couple of months has simply been working with SPs to get their boost set up correctly, to get them advertising to IP&I correctly, to make sure that they can handle a lot of requests at the same time, and just like kind of quite basic things around just making that retrieval story working. And as such, we're starting to see from the measurability that the incentives are falling into place, the pieces of the puzzle are going into place, and now we're able to debug with SPs, and we should see the use cases emerge. Okay, so when we set about measuring retrievability, what do we want to measure? It's kind of like product requirements sort of slide. The kind of very high level, we want to know across Filecoin, what is the retrieval success rate? So that's kind of was our North Star with Spark. Like, can we get an overall retrieval success rate for Filecoin? There's obviously lots of kind of asterisks around this because there's private data which we shouldn't be able to retrieve. So we have to kind of then filter down based on the data which should be retrievable. And historically, that was like fill plus LDN deals. And moving forward, that's deals which are part of allocator pathways that want retrievability to be part of their reason they're getting allocated Datacap. So yeah, a few asterisks on that, but that really is the high-level metric. And once we see that high-level metric, immediately we want to see, okay, how can we break that down? So we want to, and the obvious way to do so is to create a retrieval success rate score for each storage provider. And we've got this table I'll show you in a second where you can search a storage provider ID and you can see their Spark retrieval success rate. Once we had that in place, we then we saw that storage providers were coming to us saying, okay, how do I improve this? Like, I need visibility into where these retrievals are failing. So we also worked on breaking down the retrieval failures. So you can see, okay, this is actually a problem with how you're advertising to IP&I, or this is a problem with you not being able to get the right advertisement from IP&I, or et cetera, et cetera. So giving them visibility in where things are falling apart, we've then been able to debug with certain storage providers how they can improve their infra, improve what they're doing to improve their Spark RSR. Molly?
Yeah. What percent of errors were at IP&I versus boost versus like the configuring of retrieval?
Julian's going to look it up in the back there, and we'll get it to you shortly. I haven't got it off the top of my head. Okay, and then one constraint around these like product requirements, we really wanted this protocol to be decentralized, trustless. As I said before, we really didn't want it that we were running the client that was making the retrievals, and then suddenly this became like a really powerful part of the whole Datacap architecture, and then we were this like basically kind of dictating how much Datacap people would be getting. That just felt really wrong. So we had to make sure that the clients were run by people like in a trustless way. And so we've used the station network where we deploy the Spark client and they then make the retrieval requests. Okay, so as I said, the top level thing is about what is the overall retrieval success rate for the Filecoin network. So on the left-hand side here, you can see the overall retrieval success rate, which has been trending up since we started speaking to SPs, and the Filecoin Foundation said that Spark could be used in the future to determine Datacap, which has been really nice to see. Really nice to see that kind of trend line going up. I think we still need a little bit more data to really have confidence in that line going up and continuing to go up and to the right, but I'm really happy with what we're seeing so far. However, you might have noticed on the left that we've got like, okay, it's only 3.5% overall retrieval success rate. That doesn't sound that great. So we then went into this and said, right, how many storage providers are actually not serving any retrievals at all? And can we take them out of this whole picture? So that takes us to the chart on the right. We're saying, right, of the storage providers that have served at least one successful retrieval, so they are trying to make their retrieval story work, what is the overall retrieval success rate? And there we're seeing it trend up towards sort of 50%, which is starting to sound like a much better figure. And we're really happy, as I say, with how that trend line's going up. As I mentioned on the previous slide, the next thing we want to do is like, okay, well, can we break that down? Like, what are individual storage providers getting in terms of their retrieval success rate? So on this slide, we've got a histogram of storage providers' retrieval success rate, and then it's bucketed into 20% buckets. So in the last 90 days, you can see the histogram on the left is the retrieval success rate of storage providers. We've got a huge amount which are in that 0 to 20% bucket. So again, we're like, right, this is kind of dwarfing everything else. So what if we take out the storage providers who haven't served a single successful retrieval? And there we get like a little bit more of an informative histogram. And we can see that quite a lot have still got very low retrieval success rate, but we're starting to see a bit of action, even going up towards the 80 to 100 percentile bucket. Comparing that then to the last 7 days, we can see that the non-zero storage providers are kind of migrating across the chart from that 0 to 20 box up to the 80 to 100% box. So again, this is sort of a little bit of evidence to suggest that things are moving in the right direction, and we're starting to see people who have bothered to do at least one retrieval really improve their retrieval story and make more successful retrieval success rate. So then, what about breaking it down for individual miners, storage providers? In our Spark dashboard, which if anyone wants a link to, I can send it over to you. This is, over the last 7 days, the retrieval success rate of the top miners in terms of Spark. And it's actually been a really great week. The top storage provider with a retrieval success rate of 94% are starting to get towards, like Hannah was mentioning earlier today in her talk, that 99.9 for retrievability is really good, and 99.59 for durability is really good. Here we're talking about retrievability. So like we've got 1 9, and we could be getting 2 9s pretty soon for these top storage providers. And the whole top 10 is in the 90th percentile range. So yeah, we're really happy with how that's moving. I think in the first few weeks, we had a few in the 80 percentile ranges and then some in the 70 percentile ranges across this top 10. So again, it feels like things are moving in the right direction. And what storage providers are doing, they're going to this table in the dashboard. They can filter by their own miner ID, and they can look at their own retrieval success rate. And then they reach out to us to understand how they can improve it. So this slide here is just to show that it isn't just us making these retrieval requests. This is a network that we don't control apart from with the Spark protocol. And it's grown over the last few months. Back in January, we had just over 4,000 unique Phil wallet addresses in the network. And that's been kind of trending up to over the month of June, we had over 13,000 Filecoin wallet addresses. And just to say that an individual, they can actually run multiple station nodes with the same Phil wallet address. And that's because we didn't want people to have to manage a whole load of different Phil accounts for each one of their station nodes. So one Phil wallet address could correspond to tens of different station nodes. Julian, do you know what the maximum number someone is running with the same Phil address? Okay. But yeah, there are some power users who are running many, many different stations. So it's kind of the actual number of individual station processes is going to be much higher than that. Okay, so just kind of a review of those last few slides. We feel like the overall Spark retrieval success rate does remain quite low, and there's things for us to solve. But the context remains important. When we start to filter out people who aren't serving retrievals at all, we start to get some really meaningful data. And we do think there are some early signs that the RSR has been improving over the last 90 days, and we hope that trend continues as we speak to more storage providers and as the Spark protocol improves. Okay, so the actual protocol itself, there's lots of different steps. The step which we're spending the most time on at the moment is what we call task generation. So it's actually quite complex for us to get a set of CIDs that we're actually going to make these retrieval samples with. In the first version, which I'll go through in the next slides, actually maybe I'll speak through the whole protocol first, and then we can go into task generation. So task generation, we're trying to create this set of tasks which the station network can then make their requests with. Task sampling is then each round of the protocol. The Spark orchestrator takes a sample from the overall set of tasks that can be done, and then from that sample set, the station operators can they can just kind of work their way through that sample set during that round, which is every 20 minutes. Those two steps are still sort of in progress as we work to kind of onboard DDO and allocator pathways. Retrieval testing, this is really just the moment that that station operator has got hold of the CID it's going to make the retrieval with, and it makes that retrieval request to the storage provider. There are two more sort of in-depth cryptographic steps, which is the retrieval attestation and the proof of data possession. We're sort of blocked on these two steps at the moment, and so we're sort of paused while we work on stuff which is higher priority for us to get over the line. Fraud detection, once we've actually got hold of all these measurements, what steps can we take to make sure that station operators, which we are not in control of, are not trying to just defraud the system? And then the final step is the impact evaluator. So why are station operators doing this in the first place? We need to reward them for their work. So the impact evaluator gathers these measurements, it evaluates over all these measurements that have taken place, and then rewards the station operators for the work that they've done. And this is all on chain. We call it the Meridian Impact Evaluator. Okay, so yeah, why is task generation taking up a lot of our time? Historically, what we did is we would filter the list of Fil plus LDN deals and then be able to find a payload CID in the label metadata for each of those deals, and we could use those to make the requests. But we're actually with kind of DDO coming in, and with, well, it's actually more allocator pathways, the new allocator pathway model. We need to make sure that we're looking at the allocator pathways, which are wishing to have retrievability as one of their reasons for allocating. And then we need to understand which deals are made with Datacap from those allocator pathways. Then if those deals are made with DDO, again, we lose our visibility with this label field at the payload CID. And so we're working on how we can then listen to the events that come out of these DDO deals to then get hold of what deals we made. And then we need to also then figure out which payload CIDs are linked to the piece CIDs in those deals. Another thing which we're working on, currently we run a batch download from this snapshot of all storage market actor deals to get hold of. That's what we currently do, and it's like a batch process, but we only run it sort of once every week. So we've had storage providers come to us and say, why have I not got a Spark retrieval success rate score? I'm not even on the table. And that's because they've often just got themselves set up or just started taking these deals, and we haven't had a chance to do the batch process again. So another thing we're working on is real-time task generation, so that as soon as a deal's made, we're able to then get a Spark. We can get to a Spark retrieval success rate score for an SP as quickly as possible. And then just further tooling to help SPs improve their retrievability, visibility into what errors are coming up, visibility into what deals we are storing in the Spark tasks database, so they can see which deals they'll be measured on and things like that. Okay, I sort of just spoke through these slides there, but just to go through in a little bit more detail, yeah, we get the list of all clients from Fil plus LDN, and actually maybe I don't need to go through this. Yeah, I've already kind of spoken through all of that. I added these slides back in at the last second just in case, but yeah, this is the update we're talking about, Fil plus LDN going to these allocator pathways, and just trying to navigate that process. There is still quite a few legacy deals being made with the Fil plus LDN Datacap, so we need to make sure we're not just completely migrating away from that, but we do need to accommodate for the new allocator pathways. Yes, Molly? Yeah, great question. So with the old Fil plus LDN, it was like a condition in the kind of terms of Fil plus LDN, which said stored data should be readily retrievable from on the network. But that was sort of just that was it. And we're like, okay, it's not baked into protocol, but these are the conditions. And so we can test based on if that deal was Fil plus LDN, it should be retrievable. But with allocator pathways, we're sort of generalizing a bit. And each allocator pathway might actually have a different set of rules about how they want to allocate Datacap. So some might say retrievability is a big deal, but others, and this sort of links to that last conversation we're having, if it's all about kind of storing good archival data, retrievability might not be something they really care about at all. So we have to make sure that we are linking Spark to the right allocator pathways that care about retrievability and not to other ones. so it just gets a bit more complex. Like Spark is now a community project, like ecosystem project. It's not really for us to mandate that allocated pathways have to use Spark for retrievability. We want it to be a good enough tool that they say, we want retrievability and we want to use Spark to test that. And then we can say, okay, we can provide this service for you as an allocator to prove retrievability. And so if...
No, I disagree. I think the community as a whole can say, hey, we want the data on Filecoin to be retrievable, therefore we should test it. And very much agree that different allocator pathways should have different SLAs for retrieval, and that you should test those in a different way. But if some data isn't going to be tested, I don't think that's real.
I want to ask a clarifying question about an assumption, like a technical assumption, and I want to make sure I'm like understanding something and decoupling something. What we're talking about here is in the previous version where we had this like one multi-sig that was doing all these LDNs, you were just looking at any allocations made from that, any Datacap allocations made from that address to clients. We should assume that they should be highly retrievable. And now we have more notary allocator addresses. And so on chain, we just have more addresses and we don't know which ones necessarily should require, have like these different SLAs for retrieval. But this is a different problem than what you were talking about of like how the deal gets made with DDO and being able to find the piece or the payload. This was just being able to say, well, we were looking at one address to many clients to many SPs. And so we just said all the stuff that flowed through that pathway. Now we have multiple pathways to multiple clients to multiple SPs, and we don't know how to pick and choose. Is that correct?
Yeah, the kind of this like fill plus LDN to V5 allocated pathways is one thing, and then moving from the storage market actor to DDO is like orthogonal. That's like another upgrade migration we have to do.
But I think to Juan's point that I would personally agree with, you can run retrieval testing against anybody that's doing a verified deal and report on it. Whether or not that leads to a downstream deterministic, like your allocator is not in compliance or your SP is not in compliance or your client is not in compliance, that should be independent and should not be your problem, right? That I think that in a perfect world, Spark is tooled to be able to say, we are just looking at retrieval testing according to this set of standards that we have made public, that we can all like look at and tweak. And we are just reporting according to these standards what slices of this deal-making pie like are retrievable.
Let's see if I think I included it in like an appendix. Okay, yeah, this is, as you say, for Spark, like it shouldn't really be our concern about which allocator pathways, what they want to do to like what conditions they want to have. We want to say we provide the best retrieval solution that we can provide, and you can use it whether you want to do a one retrieval SLA on like archival stuff or you want to do hot retrieval. But going down like the whole flow from like the root key holders to meta-allocators to allocators and like, clients and SPs, Spark is essentially allowing them to understand how better to allocate. And so that's sort of the framework which you're working on and Filecoin Foundation's working on of like why we should like allocate data to certain Datacap to certain SP or certain allocators. And Spark is a tool to help you understand how to do so.
To the point though, like you kind of Spark and as a tool, we don't want to allocate it in places where it's going to create just a lot of wasted work, wasted requests if we know that that's not the goal or the thing that we're testing. So probably knowing like, okay, for this collection of the data, we want to be looking at like hot tier, hourly checks on retrievability. In this tier, we want to be looking at daily checks on retrievability. In this one, we want to be looking at monthly checks on retrievability. In this one, we actually really just want to be checking the piece CID maybe, because you don't expect to have the whole copy until you unseal it, maybe. And so you're not going to be responding to unsealing requests more than, once or twice a deal lifetime or something, depending on like what that tiering is, I do think, like, I mentioned this to Will earlier, like, I think we would benefit from codifying those tiers somewhat so that we could then program it in to what level of checking lives within each of those tiers, and then what standards are we holding a decentralized ecosystem of participants to within those areas, instead of it all being like one-off client hearsay in a conversation somewhere, because then it's too hard for the community to audit. And so then you have to put it on the client to audit, but the client is lazy and doesn't necessarily want to have to audit it. And so you just end up in this complicated world. And so I think retrieval tiers that are really explicit might help us. It's like Filecoin Plus only supports these different retrieval tiers. If you want to do something else special, different, like, you're going to have to audit that yourself. But like, this is where we, allocate the data rewards or something like that. It's an idea.
Yeah, and I think that, like, when speaking to FF and also Fiddle so far, the kind of answer we've got is that each allocator pathway was just going to have its own conditions, and there's not really a spec. And it would be really helpful for us if there was a spec. And it's like the things you mentioned in your talk earlier, where it's like retrievability or like geo-distribution, it was a spec, it was codified, and then you could have different SLA tiers, because then we could just map that into like what we actually did with Spark, rather than it feels very loose at the moment, where every allocator pathway can just come up with their own conditions for why people would store data through that pathway.
Yeah, I just like to add on to that. I feel like it's at the first ever Filecoin Dev Summit. We did like a couple workshops trying to define the bare minimum like deal interfaces, like, and also like it was like a Filecoin, like the web service idea. Nicola was like pitching this like morning and everything. I do feel like we can use more of like the common interface standard that like to help like ecosystem to build the tools, right? Because I see Spark protocol can be more powerful than just like checking Filecoin Plus, like, data stuff like in general. Because I feel like you're almost building the retrieval service, like a reputation service almost, like to see who are, like almost, right?
Yeah.
Like providing
I kind of want to avoid the
data.
word reputation, because it just gets us into, I think we want to create data which could go into reputation systems. But yeah.
So where I'm getting at is like what I'm hearing about, and also like everything we're building with like Filecoin Plus right now, it's like based on the ProRep storage. And as you know, we are trying to having more like different like services in general. And I feel like Spark can if we have a common interface, just say when you do a deal, you as the client or the pathway, whoever is like doing the deal market, there is always like a flag will be announcing the retrieval SLA that my application or me as a user client, I'm like, expecting, and got inspired by you are saying you're getting compatible with DDO, because you're basically listening to the on-chain events and decide, oh, this is actually a Filecoin Plus piece and they should be serving retrievals, and that's why Spark is actually going to be sampling them and to see the retrieval success rate. And I think that can be expanded later on. It's like I'm listening to all the pieces onboarded to Filecoin via different proof. I don't care what proof that is, what kind of storage that is, but I know me as a client, I'm paying for this, expecting this data to be retrieved in this thing, and that can be one of the things defining the sampling frequency from the Spark protocol. And if Filecoin Plus has the program with like allocators, it can be the first like programs with a lot of builders are building this allocated pathway these days to actually putting that into the application they're building, I think, and like try that. See, it's like, hey, can we just like announce an event that we can just listen to, and then you don't have to follow the same SLA. Just tell us what kind of SLA you expect your storage provider to be providing, and then we're going to do the sampling based on that. And I think that's the overall direction we should be going to. And with the interface, again, that will be simplifying the tooling support a lot in general in the long term for the network.
Yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, I'm sure we'll run into some wrinkles along the way, but it would be pretty cool to have that, like the retrieval SLA and other SLAs as part of the deal that we can then just listen to, rather than us having to sort of like scrape it out of GitHub and like put it into a database, and kind of it all just feels a little bit too loose that way.
We kind of have that with the native market, right? Like there's like a fast retrieval like flag, like people are supposed to be doing. It's like, oh, I'm like getting Datacap, so I'm providing faster retrieval, but it's like not enforcing the protocol for good reasons, right?
Yeah.
But how can we leverage those kind of things, building protocols and tools that does the check that people actually care would be really nice. And I guess my question to Galen is like, how can we work with the Filecoin Plus program and the allocators to actually run an experiment to see if they can announce the retrieval SLAs on chain so that Spark can be listening to that and do the sampling later on? Like how can we use that?
Yeah, Juan.
Do you want to respond, or I don't know if you wanted to?
No, I think that
Great.
was that felt like
Yeah,
that.
so I think to summarize some of what we're discussing is clearly different allocators will require different SLAs. Different clients will map onto those allocators. The space of SLAs isn't so big that each allocator should define its own. We want to pick from a subset. We can define that together. In fact, I think we can set that as a goal for this Field of Summit to actually walk out with a set of concrete SLAs and some other things like the geo-distribution. There's probably a few features there that you want to enable as a menu, in a sense, of an allocator, and then build against those. And I will additionally claim that there is a base level SLA, and we need to figure out what that is exactly. And that base level SLA should apply to all of the data. All of the Field Plus data should have, at worst case, that bottom tier SLA. Because that will ensure that the people can at least get their data out, the data that they put in, they can truly retrieve it. And we should kind of define that together here, at least like a working version to then test out. What I would love to get to, which is kind of like the first thing where Spark came from, is that we want to be able to draw a graph of the retrievability of all of the data on Filecoin. Like we should be able to look at one single graph that shows the retrievability of all of the data.
Were you here when this one was up?
I was here a little bit later, but I've seen these graphs before. I don't think these show you the different tiers.
Oh, you mean like these different SLAs?
Yeah, so think of like seeing the whole 100% distribution of all the data. You should be able to think of it like a stacked bar chart or something with the different tiers, right? So at the very, the bottom tier is like red is not retrievable. It's like bad. Then above that there's like yellow of like the very basic archival tier or whatever, and like then on top.
Right. Okay.
But I very much agree that this is like awesome and a step in the right direction. Do you have the view of like the whole time frame?
This is the last 90 days, it only became meaningful about 90 days ago, the data. So before that, we made a protocol change that we felt was shown before that was not worth it.
Okay.
So yeah, this would just to describe this slide again for anyone who came in. On the left, we've got the overall retrieval success rate of Filecoin for these Field Plus LDN deals, and it's down at like 3.5–4%, which on the surface doesn't feel very high, but I think then you need to like zoom in and say, okay, why is it so low? So the one on the right, we filter out any miners who haven't ever served a single successful retrieval. And so we're actually only looking at miners who are at least trying to get their retrieval working. And there we're seeing it trend up to now towards like 50% overall. So yeah, it's 50%. Obviously we can still improve, but it's it's not kind of a tiny amount now. That's like a pretty significant chunk of retrievals that are working.
I can just add, I got my question answered from earlier. Thank you, Julian, which is that about 75% of the errors are IPNI 404s, and I think it was 15. 90% of errors are missing advertisements in IPNI. Okay.
Or at least that's the first part they fail.
Yeah, they might fail other parts as well. But
Yeah.
First problem, your data wasn't indexed.
And just to say that, because I saw Massey look up there, that isn't like a particularly IPNI's fault. Like that could be the storage providers
It's a publishing
advertising to IPNI. Yeah.
Do you have the distribution of all the errors? Like that would be an awesome graph as well, right? Like
We do on Julian's computer, but not on this slide deck.
yeah. Could we get these dashboards to be public at a URL?
Yeah, it's philspark.com/dashboard.
That takes you to a Grafana instance, which I claim will continue to suffer from. We changed the protocol and we deleted the data in the past problems.
Okay.
That's my guess. because I've seen the movie before. Like whenever you use Grafana, you like change something, you look at a new graph, you dump the old stuff. The community loses the ability to like look back. If you want to keep a graph that the whole community can look at year over year, you need longevity about preserving that data in that way.
We haven't got that right now. Next, we can work on that. Yes.
We've said a few times around like codifying SLAs and like setting a standard and who gets to do this. And I think this is a perennial question that we run into as somebody who is not necessarily I'm not an owner of Filecoin Plus by any means, and no one really is, right? So when we stand this up and we say allocators should care about retrieval because that is a good metric that the clients should care about, that their SPs should care about. But as far as like writing that standard or writing the spec, I would argue that you guys are the most uniquely qualified to write that spec rather than like me sitting at the foundation and saying, okay, well, I'm going to define the retrieval SLA or spec or standard, and then you guys rise to meet mine. It makes more sense in my head. So it'd be great if I was wrong, and you like help me understand like the right way for us sitting at this level of the foundation of saying, okay, if the allocators claim they care about retrieval, we need a metric to measure that. Here is a team that is doing that. We are going to outsource that determination to this team. And what I have said consistently when SPs come and they say, oh, well, that doesn't work for me because of X, Y, and Z fabricated reason, I say, great, well, then go write your own. And then they don't. But I would be fine if there were 4 other retrieval specs that other people wrote as well. And you mentioned like these could all fit into reputation scoring, and we could just slice these as different, you look at your credit score report and they're like, we're pulling on lots of different things across different ecosystems and we're looking at different metrics and calculations. So is it fair to say that like you guys are the ones writing that standard and codifying it and coming up with your own SLAs and publishing those? Or is there an expectation that the allocators should be coming to you saying, well, this is how I define retrieval and you need to rise to the individual allocator standard? Or, where's that onus?
Yeah. Do you want to answer that one, Molly?
My proposal, I don't necessarily think it is a Spark thing. Like, I hear you that you don't feel like it's a Phil Plus program thing. I would say maybe a client working group with Spark as experts of like what is feasible for us to check over time. Or maybe that's even representatives of client working group, SP working group, and Spark. Because that has to accommodate for, what meets general client expectations. So start from AWS tiers, what fits with Filecoin capability sets. We have retrieving the actual data. We have the sealed copy versus the unsealed copy. So we have differences. We need to interpret what is going to make sense for clients as they are using Filecoin as a storage mechanism in our world. And then we need to, I think even Will had suggested like what are the retrievability tiers in Istanbul last year at a high level. I think maybe a version of interpreting, okay, here's how Spark retrieval checking would work for measuring those different retrievability tiers, because that then encodes it into, okay, here's how our retrieval service would adapt to identifying whether or not a storage provider or a specific deal fits within those different retrieval tiers. So that would be my suggestion. Like I agree, it's not like a super top-down thing, but it's more of a great, we agree on this taxonomy, and then we can just apply it, as an allocator. Sure, you can choose which of those subsets you choose to allocate within, but the baseline of that is the client can get their data back at least once, and a bonus copy for us to test that client can actually do that, so that we can verify it at a protocol level. And that's the lowest tier, and then is the highest tier every hour, every minute, probably not every second. That's too much much overhead, but like what level of retrieval testing is the highest tier of availability?
Yeah, I was just going to say that Will as well. That Will's kind of pioneered that work in like the last Phil Dev Summit, I think, or two ago. And so we could start that as a framework. We've already got that. We got that channel of FF, Fiddle, and Spark. So we could just do it amongst those groups. And as Juan was saying, we have like the baseline SLA, which all allocator pathways have to adhere to, and then you can have like the extra conditions based on the sort of data that they're willing to give Datacap to.
I had another question then going in another direction. We talked a little bit about like DDO. This is a thing that I have heard a lot of people are both excited about, but a lot of people are also both like frustrated about, because like, oh, it breaks open the landscape and we don't have to use the market actor, but then it also breaks all of these other tools that we use and things that we're building towards, because now there's no standard. And so similarly, what is the path forward here? Where is the burden of writing the standard if anyone can now use different onboarding mechanisms and we don't get payload, piece, CID, we don't get that information because there's no standard? Well, then who writes that standard and says, in order to test retrieval, we need a thing to test, so you need to put it in this format at a minimum? Because again, if we set these, like, if we set a chart of taxonomy like SLAs, but then someone comes back and say, oh, well, I actually used a different onboarding pathway and it doesn't report it, it doesn't index it, it doesn't do anything, but I promise it's retrievable. We're like, well,
Yeah, well, I suppose because it's all permissionless, people can write whatever smart contracts they want, and like there's no way we can make sure that we're covering everything all the time. And this, I guess, DDO was sort of a generalization of the F05 storage market actor, even though that still exists. From our point of view, there is at least like these events that come out of any DDO storage deal, and so that there's a spec to that, and it gives us a piece CID. The complexity we then get is like, how do we turn that piece CID into all the payload CIDs that were stored in that piece? Because that's what we're interested with. We actually want to like retrieve the individual files, and so, and that's not like an easy thing for us to solve. It might involve like us having to do this like reverse lookup through IPNI or something. So yeah, it's been a bit of a complexity for us going from the storage market actor to DDO. But yeah, then yeah, as you say, like when does that stop? Is there going to be more and more different storage or deal making contracts? Like, do we have to cover all of them? I think it's just, yeah, for us, we're just like, DDO seems like the one we've got to try and conquer next, but who knows what happens after that.
yeah, and I would argue similarly, like pick the one and say this, like Spark is reporting on this standard, and this is like what we can get out of it. This is what we're looking at. This score means according to this stat that we are able to do at this time, that's the score you get. And before we started using Spark as our mechanism, the metrics were really bad because people would be like, oh, well, I'm just using some other thing and giving you a terminal output that says like, yes, it's definitely retrievable. So the more that we as a community rally behind saying like, okay, well, this is the standard that we're going to ascribe to for now, and if that doesn't work for you, then help us write a better one. And so I would just encourage, like, if it's leading to a lot of these like hurdles of, okay, well, we can't get this payload piece, we can't look it up, we don't know how to do this, then like we need to write a different set of rules for like how it gets indexed. And then if people don't follow along those set of rules, again, then they are going to get a bad score on Spark. And if they don't have another mechanism of showing retrievability, then they have a bad score on retrievability. And then they don't get reapproved to be an allocator because they didn't follow the existing standards or help to make them better. And like that's kind of just, again, the like carrot and stick thing that we have to go to.
You have to be somewhere else in a couple of minutes, so, and we should also move on.
All right, thank you all. A great discussion.
Thank you.